To set the stage, I thought we'd start off with this quote about something as simple as a cherry. Take away the sensations of softness, moisture, redness, tartness, and you take away the cherry. A cherry, I say, is nothing but a congeries of sensible impressions or ideas perceived by various senses, which ideas are united into one thing. It really goes to show how easily we take for granted the endless sensations and perceptions we experience on a constant basis. So, what is perception? Perception is the story or meaning we make out of sensory information. As you will begin to realize throughout this course, we don't directly take in the world as it really is. Rather, our perception is a translation of information in the world into something our brains can make sense of. Even if we did take in the world as it really is, there would just be too much of it. Our brains can only process so much at once. This also means that there is much of the world that we are not sensitive to, that we are not even aware of. Everything we see, hear, taste, smell, and feel is a translation by our perceptual systems. Take vision, for example. Objects that we see don't just enter through our eyes. Rather, what we see involves complex processing and transformation. What we see is light. Our eyes are basically light detectors. Light takes on different properties of what it reflects off of, and that is what we see when we see an object. Color is just another property of light. And the color we see can depend very much on the lighting conditions, whether we are out in bright sunlight or inside under artificial lighting. And this is only the beginning. Vision also involves a number of complex processes of recognition and interpretation. Perception is as much about you as it is about the world. What we are aware of in the world as experienced by a human is different from that of your dog. It is even different from person to person. Next, we are going to go over 5 important points that will lay a framework for the rest of the class. The first is what is referred to as the law of specific nerve energies. Mueller was a physiologist who studied nervous tissue. In his work, he emphasized that what we experience is a function of what part of the nervous system is active. In other words, the nature of a sensation depends on the particular set of nerve fibers that are stimulated. So, take chocolate ice cream, for example. When you look at it, you experience its color and form. That involves one set of neural fibers. Then you taste it, and the flavor you experience is the result of a different set of fibers. You touch it, and a set of neural fibers signals its coldness. Finally, say you drop it on the ground. Once again, the sound it makes is dependent on the neural fibers activated. So the quality of what we experience depends not only on the object in the world, but also the sensory modality or set of neural fibers we use to take in the information. So if, for example, sound waves could reach the eyes and stimulate the receptors in our eyes, we would see sound. The second point refers to how our sensory modalities are specifically designed to tune into information that is relevant to our lives. Take frogs, for example. Frogs will starve among dead flies. The reason for this is that frogs see flies by detecting their movement. Their visual systems are tuned to movement. That is what is relevant to their existence. Likewise, humans see what is relevant to the human way of life. Dogs can hear much higher frequencies and have greater smell than we do because those sensory modalities are so much more important to a dog's daily life. Bees navigate using polarization, a quality of light that is outside of our visual experience. They also detect more ultraviolet light so that they can see more of the color spectrum of flowers. Bats use self-produced ultrasonic echoes to navigate in complete darkness. Trout have tiny biomagnets in their noses that let them use the Earth's magnetic field to orient their navigation. There is no single environment that all animals live in, and therefore sensory and perceptual systems evolve and operate differently depending on what the animal needs to live and survive in its environment. Very importantly, what this means is that our brains and our minds aren't just big open slates that take in everything in the world and perceive it for exactly what it is. Perception is selective. So, instead, there is information in the world around us that we simply are not sensitive to. And even the information that we are sensitive to, we perceive in such a way with such qualities that are most relevant to us. The next point involves how complex our sensation and perceptual systems can be, despite their apparent simplicity. Vision, for example, is something that is easy and effortless for us, while performing lengthy calculations can be quite challenging. However, the easy things for us are very difficult in artificial intelligence. Programming a computer to play chess is quite simple, but as for vision, even very few even the very few computers that can see are very basic and are usually million-dollar projects. When you do look at the various functions of different parts of the brain, you find that most of the brain is devoted to seeing, and only a very small portion is dedicated to the more difficult things like chess. One example of the complexity of vision is the detection of edges. Edges play a very important part in our ability to visually perceive the world. So much so that the edges we perceive are even enhanced by the brain. Humans can easily classify and tell the difference between an edge made by a shadow and that of an object. However, computers really struggle with this. And how do our visual systems know a shadow is not part of the object that creates it? There are different types of edges caused by illumination versus the reflectance of light off of the surface of an object. And our visual systems know how to tell these types of edges apart. This is more difficult for computers to do. The fourth point, we do not perceive the image that is projected into our eyes and onto our retinas. Due to the nature of the eye, the image that ends up on each of our retinas is upside down and reversed left to right. However, we see the world in an upright and unflipped way. This is, again, because our perceptual system is translating the visual information we are taking in and converting it into a form that we can best use. Also, our eyes are constantly jittery and moving. Change is actually needed on the retina or the receptors wouldn't work right. Yet, we don't perceive all of this jumping around and jittering of the image on the retina. We still perceive a constant world. Part of the reason for this is, as we will discuss later in the course, that during the saccades or movements of our eyes from one fixation point to the next, we stop processing the information on the retina. For this reason, you will never see your own eyes move. Also, our perceptual system has overcome the challenge of tracking moving objects. According to the image projected onto the retina, the object our eyes are tracking is in a fixed location because our eye is moving as the object moves, while the world behind the object is moving along and across the retina. However, our perceptual systems perceive a moving object within a stationary world. And there is even the fact that our eyes blink all of the time. That means the image on the retina is coming and going, yet we still perceive a constant world. As I hope you are beginning to see, perception is very adaptive. These examples bring us to the last point, and that is that all perception involves action. The world itself is always moving, and we are always moving. Perception wouldn't be very useful if we could only perceive a static, stationary world. We don't just sit motionlessly and let the world flood our brains. Rather, we sample our environment purposefully. However, as I mentioned with the last slide, action induces ambiguity. Let's try a demonstration of this ambiguity. Hold out a finger in front of your face. Now, without moving it, look to the left and then to the right. You can do this a couple of times. Now, move your finger to the left and to the right and back and forth while your eyes look straight forward. In both of these cases, the image of the finger sweeps back and forth across the retina. In other words, the retina receives the same image in both cases. How is it that our visual system can distinguish one instance from the other? There are many ways in which our perceptual systems solve this ambiguity for us. In this case, one way in which it does this is by keeping track of the motor commands sent to the eye muscles. When the eye muscles are activated, we know that the object in front of us is most likely stationary, and the movement is our own. So what we will try to overcome in this course is something called naive realism. This is the idea that the world is exactly as it appears. If it were the case that the world were exactly as it appears, we wouldn't be able to explain why sometimes different people experience the same environmental event differently. And here is just one example of this. This image is called a Necker cube. You have very likely seen it before, and it is an excellent example of how a single image can change in appearance from moment to moment. It is possible one moment to imagine that we are viewing the cube from slightly above, with the green dot located in the very back bottom corner. And in the next moment, it is possible to have the perspective that we are looking at the cube from below, with the green dot on the corner that is jutting out closest to us. And here's another example. In this case, it is possible to see the object either as a blue vase or two white faces facing each other. In either case, we are viewing the same exact visual stimulus, but it is possible to perceive two very different objects. In this course, we will learn about different cues our perceptual systems use to correctly identify what we see despite the ambiguity of what sensory stimulation we are receiving from the world. For example, if we get rid of some of the edges, suddenly now the ambiguity is gone. So in this course, we will address many interesting questions about how our sensory and perceptual systems work, such as why do objects appear colored? Or how can we determine whether an object is large and distant or small and close? How do we know what the objects that we see are for? Do newborn babies see the world in the same way that we do? Can people see without being aware of what they see? All this and more, we have a very exciting course ahead of us.